Howdy, folks. Woo! All right. Okay. We're going to talk about the role of CEO. It does get talked about a bit. What I have learned over the years as a founding CEO who started in my parents' basement, and we've grown and scaled a company, paying customers in 160 countries, raised over $100 million. We're number 2 in America for small business accounting software, and number 1 globally for self-employed folks. It's not a super well understood role. There's a great deal of ambiguity around it, in that hits a variety of constituents. So for founding CEOs, I often find the CEOs themselves. Actually, fun fact, I don't have a clicker, so I don't know if somebody wants to bring me one of those. Or maybe that's up here and I'm on my own. Okay, very good, thank you. The role is, often not well understood by the people in the role. That part of it's near and dear to my heart. But I find it spreads out, and so this talk is applicable to many other constituents as well. You have investors and board members, executive team members, employees, sometimes the media, and also just people on the street who read newspapers. So my hope is you find this applicable no matter who you are in the room to you, and there's some value for you. But with that as a bit of a primer, I want to talk about why I want to talk about this. So I was asked to talk, the whole purpose of this conference is to help us collectively as a community scale these businesses. And so it was like, hey, Mike, talk about something scale. Maybe it's how you scale your sales and marketing team or what have you. And I said to myself, well, what might I talk about that I've learned personally that I don't feel gets enough airtime? And that's this role. And so, part of my journey goes back to the basement. Literally spent 3.5 years in my parents' basement. And I remember constantly scanning online articles and stuff for inspiration, this kind of thing. And I remember reading, I think it was in Entrepreneur magazine, this person who was running a 4-person company. And congrats to them, they got some great ink. But this person had the audacity to call themselves a CEO. And it was a 4-person company. And I was completely disgusted by this concept at the time. And if you roll back to those days, I called myself the VP of marketing because I just couldn't get my head around, I'd never worked in a company with a CEO, so I had no role model to work from. And I just couldn't believe that a company at this size needed somebody that had this handle. And what that fundamentally came down to is I just didn't get what it was. And so I think it's important for the CEOs in the room and for others to get it. And again, we'll spend some more time on why. But before I go any further, just set a little more context and set some assumptions. What I'm going to do today is talk about founding CEOs. Not all CEOs. There's professional CEOs, broadly speaking, simplistically speaking. There's founding CEOs and there's professional CEOs. And if we do a little bit of history and we go back to the .com sort of, 1999, 2000, all that kind of stuff, history of the technology industry would be, the playbook looks something like this. It's all well and good to have the founder start the company and get it going, but our strategy is, as investors mostly, we're going to invest and we're going to fire the founder. That's pretty much the playbook. We're going to install our person. Founders don't know how to run companies. This is ridiculous. And what happened about 10 years ago, for folks who are following along at home, is a new venture capital firm got started, Andreessen Horowitz, and they came out and just said, listen, we have a completely different take on this. We are going to back founding CEOs. And you want to know why? It's because the 30 biggest technology companies that we can find, with the exception of 2, were started and continue to be run by a founding CEO. And they wrote a great blog post on this. You can look it up. But they distilled it down to a few things, which was total knowledge, or something along those lines, really around understanding the customer, the market, all those kinds of things, which is hard to replace for somebody coming in. Also, moral authority. When you make the decisions early, when you start a company, changing them later, when somebody new comes in, changes something, they don't have the moral authority to do that, so helpful to have it. And then a third thing, which was just a pure commitment to the long term. But the real reason they decided to back founding CEOs was because they seemed to have better performance over the long run. Okay? And they built the biggest companies. As an venture investor, that's what you do. And so simplistically, they said to ourselves, hey, it's a lot easier to train a CEO and surround them by people than it is to hire in all the knowledge that founder CEO has. So we're going to take a different approach and build around that founding CEO. So assumption number one is this talk is going to be about founding CEOs. And that's some of the why we would choose that point of view. And then thing number two is this, and it's a hard fact, and we'll get into it later, and it's awkward given the room, but I'm going to tell you something because I think it's important to just know and get it over with, which is outside of the role of CEO, every function in your company, certainly executive level, will be run by a professional at scale. Probably not a founder. Very rare that founders scale in other departments, and probably not the management team you have today if you're at a certain size and you want to be really, really big. Okay, and so we'll get into how that complicates things in a while. But those are two important dynamics as we go through a bunch of this stuff, and it's a fact. So with that said, let's talk about what a CEO really does. I believe a CEO has 3 jobs to perform. They're pretty simple. Lay them out for you, and we'll build, and we'll show you how this gets more and more complex as we go. So what are the 3 jobs that you should reasonably be able to expect your CEO to do? Thing 1, set the company's vision. Critically important. I remember when I was back in the basement, I was like, what does a CEO do? I didn't understand. People were like, it sets the vision. And I was like, what the hell is vision? and how do you set it? And so, just very concisely, a vision is an articulation of how the world is different in the future because your company existed. Okay, you somehow changed the world. And it's a destination on the horizon that you and your team never, ever get to. But if you do a good job articulating that vision, then people inside the company have a set of useful guardrails. They know what direction to go into, and they know, we don't want to go way off away from that vision. So it's critically important, as is imbuing it throughout the company. So that's job 1. Job 2, build the team. Now, you might think that's just the employee group. I think it's broader. So job 1 is build a high-performing executive team, hire them around you, and this is where it gets difficult because that actually means editing your team. You're going to have different people at different stages that, frankly, you're going to need to bring somebody in who's ready for that next stage. And that's hard, but that's your job. Thing number 2, build and surround yourself with a good board. Some of you may not have boards. I think at times it's a very healthy discipline to have a quarterly check-in to some other folks. If you bring on investors, you're certainly going to have a board. My bias is you need to be very deliberate to the extent you can be. I know it's not easy. But to construct that board with people that you believe are going to bring a good dynamic, okay? It's not about the money. You're building a team, okay? That's your job as a founding CEO. Don't lose sight of that. There's the employees, like the whole company you're probably going to be involved with. I made it to 150 people interviewing everybody. Then we hired 40 people in a quarter. I couldn't do it anymore, or couldn't keep up. I would have loved to have. And so now I hire involved with directors and above. But you're going to find your own way to help influence the hiring of the team. And then finally, and I think importantly and perhaps under-realized, is the partners that surround the company. And these can take a variety of forms. Yeah, maybe it's your law firm and your accounting firm, but most of us in the technology industry are not able to really achieve scale without working closely with other companies and partners. And so those partners that you choose and their culture and the technical, all these things, those decisions are on you. Okay, so make good ones. The third job of the CEO is to make sure there's enough dollars in the bank. The way I like to articulate this is to make sure your bank account, the size of your bank account matches the ambitions of your vision, okay? If you have a great team in place and you have a big vision, go get the capital to go and chase it. Critically, critically important, okay? So anyone in this room can reasonably expect every one of their CEOs to get these 3 things done. Does not mean they have to do all of them, but they have to get them done. All right, that's the simple part. Now we're going to layer in a little bit of complexity. Turns out there's 3 types of CEOs, in my opinion. Okay? 3 types. The first one I would call the visionary. Okay? This is someone who has an uncanny ability to look far off into the future. I'm not talking a year or 5 years. I'm talking describe in exacting details what's going on 20 years down the road. This is the kind of person who might say something that sounds very, very naive to you today. But it's probably because they're just way, way ahead of you, okay? This person is probably not super operational. They may be deeply technical. I think you kind of, at the extremes, in my opinion, you probably want the visionary CEO to take one of 2 forms. Either to be a great spokesperson and out there in front of the company sort of telling the story, or you want them to be like deeply technical and really leading there, okay? And so who the picture of these folks might be, I have heard the founder of eHarmony was like a PhD psychologist who did all that stuff. And apparently he just spent all his time on the road telling the story. And if 10 people could get together, he would go and tell that story. And then, you know, I've seen Vitalik of, Ethereum, thank you, speak once. And my guess is he probably lives a little more in the visionary side. Yes, still contributing code and what have you, but very much there. So that's type 1. Type 2. Type 2 is the builder, okay? This person is going to have some vision, but probably not as much or as long. And their strength is going to be basically understanding the customer, understanding the market, understanding the capabilities of the technology and the team. And what they're really brilliant at is taking those Lego blocks and putting them together and bringing them to market. Okay? This might be, you know, a great sense for brand, a great sense for product. But this person is probably capable of touching all the disciplines in a variety of ways and contributing in a variety of ways. Okay? And I think you'd say like I think you'd probably put Steve Jobs in this bucket of he's doing both those things, okay? Then next up, you have the operator. The operator is somebody who probably has the least amount of vision in this group, but they excel completely in operating, like operational excellence and efficiency, okay? And so they're constantly pushing to like turn the crank faster, sharper, leaner, okay? And funnily enough, I've been scratching my brain. I don't know if I have a picture of like a famous one that fits this bill, but you know, these are folks who often live in like low-margin businesses where operational excellence is sort of key, and that's the gist of things. So before I move on, I want to just talk about how each one of these, like, you can be successful if you're any one of these. Not passing any judgment there, but I think the plays you run are different depending on who you are. So that visionary CEO is probably less operational. You know, if they're going to need to raise funds, you know, people might love their vision but want to know there's something behind it. So they probably want to pair up with like a highly operational CFO early in the journey, okay? The builder is somebody who can touch all the pieces and probably has strengths in a variety of areas, and they probably just want to fire themselves as quickly as they can and bring in things that give them the least energy. And then the operator, chances are, they really need a co-founder or to hire in somebody who's going to be that product visionary, get to, you know, kind of run that product discipline, and probably hire that a little sooner than somebody like a builder might, okay? So the point is, hey, you can be successful with any 3 of these. The important thing to do is to sort of understand which one you may be, or if you're working with somebody who's a CEO, which one they are, and then how do we partner to augment them? I think that's the important thing. So we've got 3 different jobs a CEO must do. We've got 3 different types of CEO. It's not too complex yet, but there is a 3rd dimension, okay? The 3rd dimension is this, is stage of business. All right? At the startup stage, we have no revenue. We have no product. We have to turn nothing into something. We have to attract people to us when there's no good reason to do it, whether they be employees or financial folks, okay? There's just basically different things you need to do. And depending on what kind of CEO you have, it might be that the visionary is either hitting the road to go and tell the world about it, and some people back at the ranch are kind of building the company, or they might be, you know, a very technical person who's really building that product, and someone else needs to explain it to the world. It really depends. But the point is, at this stage, you're turning nothing into something. And it's a different stage than the other three, and what is going to be expected of a CEO is going to be different. At the scaling phase, I'd say this is the $5 to $30 million revenue stage. Now you're establishing KPIs, you're scaling your revenue, you're building your team, you're probably going from like 40 to, I don't know, 200, maybe 100, 150 people, something like that. You're implementing KPIs. You're starting to get some process going. And it requires different skills than the time before. And I think that that's important. And so folks who are really in the weeds at the startup thing and knew everything, they got to let go of the reins, build a management team that's starting to scale things, all non-trivial depending on where you come from and what your tendencies are. And then finally, we have the expansion stage. And if it's 1999, I go ahead and say, hey, congratulations. You've done a great job turning nothing into something, going and finding a market and building a product. You've scaled it up to, I don't know, $30 million in revenue. As a CEO, founding CEO, this is where you're most likely to get fired. Okay? Why is that? Well, the expansion stage, the goal is different. What you're trying to do is, you've proven there's a business here. You've got it kind of going, and now the goal is to extract as much value from this product cycle and opportunity as you can. Okay? And so the way to do that is probably, maybe the operator has the best chance of doing that. The other two are likely not to be as excellent there. I'm more in the builder category person. We're definitively in the expansion stage. So what do? We brought in like a president-like animal. Somebody's had a lot of success. He actually only works with us 3 days a week. Does it from Boston, believe it or not. But he's way better at doing all those things than me. So a great partner to me as a builder. Got it this far, great. Straight out of a textbook, 300 plus employees. Founder CEO brings somebody in to help really drive the pace of the company and scale the operations. But the point is, there's these three things. So, okay, we have 3 jobs that need to get done. We have 3 types of CEOs, and we have 3 stages of business. So why is this so complex? Well, it's awfully complex because that's 3 by 3 by 3. Okay, is the way I think about it. The framework, it's 3-dimensional chess, whatever you wanted to call it. Anyways, here's my mental model. And this is why this role gets complicated and where some things go wrong. Here's my mental model. I think the role of the CEO can be represented in a way by a Rubiks Cube. Okay. 3 by 3 by 3. What else is 3 by 3? A Rubiks Cube. And this right now, up the board, is exactly what you think a CEO probably is. Everyone has in their head what is an ideal CEO, right? And it looks just like this. It's a perfect Rubik's Cube, okay? But reality is likely something very different. Because if you factor in what type of CEO you have and the stage of business you're in, which is fundamentally not static, and then the job that needs to get done, because maybe we're in a fundraising moment, or maybe we're in a product moment, or what have you, the jobs need to get done. And so all of a sudden you can see, like, everyone's mental model is the thing on the left, reality's in the middle, and then, fast forward like 10 minutes, change has happened. We actually, need something else, okay? Or our interpretation of what we need is different in our perception. And so you can see why, think of it at the board level. Hey, we need to, fire the CEO. It's an easy thing to do. If you hand a piece of paper to all those board members and ask them to write down what they want from their CEO, I would go 0% of them, aside from one thing, 0% of them would have the same thing on the piece of paper. Aside from one thing, results. There'd be that. Everything else would probably be completely different, okay? And it's because of this, right? It's a multi-dimensional thing, and the circumstances are changing all the time. Okay? So, sort of summing up, I think you can see how this gets complex and why it would be sort of poorly understood. And so the reason I wanted to give this talk is in the spirit of helping us scale and build these businesses. There was a slide up here in the presentation before me, some great exits. Atlassian, Twilio, Shopify, Dropbox, can't remember the 5th one. 4 out of the 5 were run by founding CEOs. The one that wasn't, Atlassian, because their founding CEO died. Okay? So I think there's some credence to this. And so I think as executive team members or what have you, no matter what role you are in the constituency, I think it's very easy to say, hey, we need to swap out the CEO. What I would ask you to do instead is maybe contemplate using this as a framework to think about what is it that we need to do and how do we support this person, whether you work with them or not, okay? And then this is critically important. To all the CEOs in the room, this is not an excuse to be a jerk, okay? It's not an excuse to be a jerk. And your job is not a given and you don't walk on water, any of that crap, okay? I think to keep in the role, you need to do a couple things. The first is you need to be utterly committed to your own personal growth and transformation, okay? It is very hard. You saw those Rubiks Cubes. That's you. That's what's needed. It is incredibly challenging. I'm gonna ask for empathy for all the other constituents and how do we support them, but it's a fact, okay? The other thing you have to do besides committing yourself to growth, and I think this is the path to it, is develop the greatest sense of self-awareness you possibly can, okay? And that may look like seeking out feedback and sometimes from your biggest critics, but if you are not self-aware and you don't listen, I know great CEOs who have this unfortunate quality. They put up great numbers and they still get fired, okay? You have to be open, you have to be self-aware, and you have to be committed to growth. So that kind of concludes the talking part. My hope here is, for the CEOs, maybe that's a little less ambiguity, a little more clarity for how to think about your role, what you're going through, what you need to do. And for everyone else, an opportunity to sort of diagnose the situation and figure out how to support your CEO. And so with that, we're going to flip to some Q&A here. So what happens when founding CEOs can't build the vision, and what should they do? Great question. I've lived this one personally. Let me tell you my story. So my version of a vision used to be, I would take all the stickies, and I put them on a whiteboard, and it was like beautiful mind time. Okay, it was completely crazy, and uninterpretable, and it was like a million little things, and people were like, that is not the vision. And so I think, I had the good fortune of working with an executive leader who was like, okay, let's talk about this. How do we turn this into a story? And we turned it into a story of the customer, and then we got the output that we wanted. It was in me, it just needed to be extracted, okay? So I think before you say the CEO can't build the vision, I'd ask yourself, have you done everything you can to try and draw it out of them? Because maybe they can. Number two, I like being a founder, 100% owner, because I don't answer to anyone. I'm worried that if I take VC funding, I'm going to have a boss again. Does this resonate? Absolutely. We sort of semi-famously didn't raise any outside capital for 10 years. I had people banging down my door, and it was for this reason. What I found for me personally was once I de-risked the product and the market and the category, and I'd finally started building a team around me, and I'd realized, the team was the thing that would enable scale, I became personally much less concerned about bringing on other parties. You have to find your own path. Some people want to own 100% of a small thing. For me, the journey of growth and challenge was more interesting than just owning 100% of something that would be held back and not able to scale. And what I have found is these businesses require a lot of capital to scale. Next, how are you investing into your personal growth as a CEO to keep up with changes within your organization? I think, for me personally, a couple thoughts. One is, the goal is to ideally be ahead of your organization and bringing them along. And so, I think where I sometimes get it wrong is I spend too much time in the organization and not enough time outside of the organization so that I have enough distance to pull folks forward. But then, the things I mentioned, like getting feedback, and I've started on my own sort of mindfulness practice. I have some tendencies. We all have biases and tendencies. We all need to grow. For me, a hard thing's always been like talking last in the meeting. I have the answer, I have it now, let's go, right? And be quiet and make space as you scale for things. That's a hard thing for me to learn. So, I think there's just work to do on some of the small things for each and every one of us. And then, Mike, at what point were you comfortable taking on the CEO title? There's a part of me that might say never, right? I think I've grown into it, and I'm doing it now. Honestly, my experience was looking down the nose of it at early days. If it helps the outside world understand your role or your team do it, then do it day one if you like. It's a personal thing. That was my experience, but it's a communication device as much as anything. So I believe that concludes my talk.